Hello, good afternoon everyone. Today we will discuss about recovery schemes. Now, whenever a transaction is going on, there will be multiple files which are open in order to process that particular transaction. And in case of a system crash or a failure, we have to work with these files to get back into a stable state. That means a recovery, database recovery is a process of restoring the database to a correct state in case of failures. What are the possible failures? It may be a failure of a transaction due to maybe logical errors or otherwise data errors, system errors, etc. Or it may be a system crash which also includes the software failures, hardware failures or power cuts, or there may be media failures wherein the storage disks, hard disks or such things fails and which may lead to loss of data. Now, when I talk about recovery process, so whenever a DBMS crashes, system crashes, the recovery concept of DBMS, feature of DBMS has to take care of these following points. What are those? First and foremost is to check the state of all the transactions that were being executed, whether they are completed or partially completed or they are failed, whatever is the state, it has to check out. Then the transaction may be in the middle of the process. In that case, atomicity should be ensured. You have to see to that. Either if it has almost completed and only commit was pending, maybe you will be able to commit it, or otherwise if it was half done, you have to revert everything. All these things depend. So, it has to ensure atomicity. So, it should check whether the transaction can be completed or it needs to be rolled back depending upon the situation. If the commit was entered but the database updation was not done, maybe you can do it. If not, it has to be rolled back because half of the things are done, not everything is completed. You know atomicity, either do all or none. So, you have to see those things because no transaction can leave a DBMS in an inconsistent state. Now, how do we do these things? How do we ensure this? There are different techniques. Two of them basically, one is a log based recovery and another one is shadow paging. Log based recovery even includes your checkpointing. Basically what happens is you maintain a log of you make an entry of every transaction, action taken in every transaction, so that you can use that log to redo or undo the transactions whenever there is a failure in order to get your database to a consistent state. In that, checkpointing can be used. It is nothing but periodical saving of the database. From time to time you keep updating it to the database so that whenever you have a situation of recovery where you have to come back, you can revert back to the last checkpoint or a specified save point after your commit, and so that in a lot of logging can be avoided, and you know that up to then you have already written, you can just commit them and go ahead with the things. Maintaining shadow pages, whenever failure occurs, the system can revert to the shadow copy. That means instead of making an updation to original thing, you make it to the copy so that the original thing can be restored back. Shadow can be, the duplication copy can be just ignored. So, shadow copy is the original copy. Now, let us look into log based recovery scheme. What is a transaction log? It is very crucial component of DBMS in order to maintain data integrity and consistency. A transaction log, or even called as write ahead log, is a record, sequential record that tracks all the changes made to the database. That is, the information about the transaction is written to the log even before it is committed to the database. So, this information can be used either to redo the operations in case of completed transaction or otherwise to undo an incomplete transaction in case of failures. Now, what are the kind of information that is stored in a record transaction log? It is every transaction will have a transaction ID. It will perform the maintain about information about what kind of transaction it is, whether it is insert, delete, update, etc. Affected data, which particular table, which column or which row is being affected. Then it will have before image and after image. What was the data or state of that particular database before the transaction, that is for undo operation, or otherwise after the transaction. In case if you have transaction has been committed but updates are not been done to the database, then you can redo these operations. Or it can be the timestamp when the record log has was recorded in the log, then the log sequence number. For each log there can be a log sequence number. Now let me first explain you how a transaction record is written into the log. Okay, let me just get to this. Okay, every transaction that modifies a database, an entry is made to the log in this particular fashion. What is this? It is going to be a transaction ID STI. It is modifying the data xj and a value before the transaction and the value after the transaction, so that this can be used for undo, this can be used for redo operation. Similarly, TI start, an entry would be made into the log whenever the transaction begins, so that in case of your recovery schemes, either it can come up to maybe there was a save point or commit, anything like that, or otherwise backtrack till start, so that you can undo all that operation. So it's like that. So start or TI commit or TI abort. Commit when the transaction is completed successfully, abort when it needs to be made any changes. Okay, let's see. So we understood what is a transaction log. Now let us try to see how using this log, the log based recovery works. Whenever I talk about log based recovery, it is the most common recovery method or technique which is used in DBMS. Basic idea is it keeps the log of all the changes made to the database, so that after the failure it can use that particular data to restore the database into a consistent state. What are the steps? First step, transaction logging. As we said, every action is written into the transaction. Writing to the log, it is basically a write ahead log. So before you update into the database, you are writing it into the log. That is what is very important. Ensuring the logs are written first, the system can later recover and apply, undo any changes, apply or undo any changes. The third one is checkpointing. Checkpointing is basically a synchronization between the database and its log. From time to time, periodically, you are making all the changes in the main memory at a particular point to be written into the disk, and that is noted as a checkpoint. So a special entry is made in the log indicating the checkpoint. So this helps in reducing the amount of log that needs to be scanned during recovery. So what happens is, from time to time you have taken a snapshot of the actions that has happened. So when you get back to the checkpoint, you know what are the things that has to be updated, or up to then it is already written, all these type of information. We will see how it works in case of our recovery. Then comes the recovery process. It will have two phases, redo or undo. Redo says when the transaction is identified as have been committed, but the changes are not updated to the database. Then what are you supposed to do? Seeing the log entries, you need to redo them. That means due to the crash, before the changes could be written onto the disk, the changes has to be reapplied using the after image from the log. That is, after the transaction, what the state of the database should have been, because I have written the entry before, but before I could update into the database, the system got crashed. Remember, logs are always written into a non-volatile memory so that it is not lost. Fine. Next, undo. If the transaction is identified as not having committed at the time of crash, any changes it made are reversed using the before image to ensure the atomicity. You know that half of them have been done, so it is updated to the database, cancel it, that is revert back. Finally, commit or rollback, this is again that only. If you have an entry of ti.commit, you have to make sure that all the entries are made permanent or otherwise durable. If the transaction is aborted, the rollback record is written. Using the log, you can cancel out these things. So this is basically about how it works in a log based recovery. Now when I talk about this, there can be two types of entries in case of recovery. The procedure is called as deferred log or write through log. We will just see how it works. So in case of a deferred log, or we say it as a deferred update, the transaction operations do not immediately update the physical database. Instead, only the transaction log is updated. Okay? The database is physically updated only after the transaction reaches the commit point using the information on the transaction log. How it does that, we will see. For any recovery process, for all the started and committed transactions, when you understand that the transaction got committed before the failure, we will just see the steps. First and foremost, identify the last checkpoint in the transaction log, because you know that until then we have written everything on the database. So this is the last time the transaction was physically saved to the disk, because we understood checkpoint as from time to time I am updating to the database. Now for a transaction that started and committed before the last checkpoint, you need not have to do anything because it is already saved. But for a transaction that performed a commit operation after the last checkpoint, the DBMS uses the transaction log records to redo the transaction, and update the database using the after values. This is what we understood in our redo operation. But for any transaction that has a rollback, that is aborted operation after the last checkpoint or was left alive there, okay, active there with neither commit or no rollback, in such case, before the failure occurred, nothing needs to be done, as you know that we have never updated the database. Up to checkpoint we had done, but after that it failed. So that means any transaction that you have done or otherwise half done is not updated to the database. You need not worry at all, just leave aside. So in case of deferred lag, problem or updation or redoing the work only is affecting committed transactions only after the checkpoint. Whereas in case of a write ahead log, what will happen in case of a write ahead log? So when I see say write ahead, alongside it is written onto the database also. Log as well as the database are updated together. That is what is write through. Now how do I perform the recovery steps? So first and foremost, you see, identify the last checkpoint in the transaction log, because till then I have updated to the disk. For a transaction that started and was committed before the last checkpoint, nothing needs to be done, because before it is done. So along with this, it has been updated. So write through, so whatever is updated is fine, because it is a committed transaction. But for a transaction that was committed after the last checkpoint, the DBMS redoes the things using the after values of the transaction log. For a transaction that had a rollback operation after the last checkpoint was left active also, the DBMS uses the transaction log record to roll back or undo the operation using the before values. Here it is required, because why we need to undo? Basically, along with the transaction log, I have updated the database also. But what has happened is it's a rollback situation. So I need to undo the things using the before value. Okay, so this is what is log based recovery. The benefits would be atomicity, durability and efficiency. Atomicity, because in case if the transaction was aborted, I know that I will be able to revert back, so that I am doing either all or none. Durability ensures that the transaction is committed, its effects are permanent and can be reconstructed even after the system failure. That is how I assure durability. That is why I require recovery. Then efficiency is, since logging typically involves sequential write, generally it is faster than the random access writes to the database. So, these are going to be the benefits of log based recovery system. The next type is shadow paging, that we will see in our next lecture. Thank you.